I used to work overnight shifts at a little Pizza Hut that closed at 3 a.m. on weekends. I was taking a gap year from college at the time, so my manager loved scheduling me on the 9 p.m., 3 a.m. slot. There were usually three of us on: a cook, someone on the phones, and a driver. That night, the cook was Marco, grumpy, mid 20s, worked two jobs, so I didn't argue when he tossed me an order to deliver late. Around 2:20 a.m., I got an order to a place I still remember vaguely, something like 142 Birch Hollow. I jumped in my beat-up 1998 Toyota Corolla and drove off. After leaving the main road, the town just kind of disappears into trees. No streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the dark. I turned off onto the unpaved drive, and a few seconds later felt a loud bang and the car start to wobble. Flat front passenger tire, for sure. I could see the house from where I stopped. An ordinary house tucked into the trees, lights on inside but the blinds closed. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the porch to ring the bell. A young guy answered, looked normal enough, and took the pies without issue. I told him about the flat, and he acted concerned, handed me cash, and offered to check the tire. We walked together toward my car. When we reached the spot, he knelt down and started looking the wheel over, then said he needed tools from inside. While he ducked back to the house, I walked the driveway a little further and found the reason for the flat: a small metal strip stuck across the dirt. It was a spike strip, basic but definitely capable of popping a tire. Someone put that there on purpose. My stomach dropped. I played it cool, walked back, and told him I hadn't found anything. He shrugged, went inside to grab the tools, and I watched him through the window until he reached the front door. As soon as he disappeared, I got back in the car, started it, and reversed carefully, making sure to avoid that spike strip this time. I didn't want to be around to find out what tools meant. I eased onto the main road, keeping the speed down so I wouldn't wreck the rim, and glanced in the rear view. The guy was running, fast, toward my car. I floored it as best I could, the tire whining and the wheel taking more abuse with every mile. Eventually, he fell behind and disappeared into the dark. It was a slow, nerve-tangled 20-minute crawl home. I told Marco and the other driver the whole story when I got back. Marco told me to take it easy and go straight home, but I sat in my car for a few minutes, checking for headlights behind me before pulling away. Halfway home, I noticed a car with no headlights riding close behind me. I pulled off in front of a small house to see if they'd do the same. They pulled past, stopped a little further down, then, like someone flicked a switch, they peeled out and vanished into the night. I called the non-emergency line and had a cruiser come to my location. The cop rolled up, I pointed to the car that had been following, and he immediately took off after it with lights on. I couldn't follow with the blown tire, so I limped home and parked in my driveway. I don't know if that officer ever caught the guy. I like to think he did. After that night, I always checked my back seat and mirrors before getting out of the car, drove with the radio on during late shifts, and quit that job a couple months later. I never went on another delivery down those dark private drives. It was supposed to be one of my last deliveries of the night. Back then, I worked at a small local pizzeria called Tony's Pizza and Subs. My manager that night, Sal, was in charge of handing out deliveries. Around 11:45 p.m., he gave me an order for a couple of plain pies along with a slip of paper that had the address and the customer's phone number. This was back in 2011, and I didn't own a smartphone yet, just a cheap flip phone with no GPS. I didn't have a Garmin either, so I still relied on one of those old spiral-bound Macs. The delivery was on a road called something like Maple Hollow Lane, out in a really rural part of town. Lots of woods, scattered farmland, barely any streetlights. It was the kind of place where missing an address was way too easy. After getting turned around twice and pulling over to check the map under the dome light, I gave in and called the number on the slip. The phone rang at least 10 times before someone picked up. No hello, no greeting, just silence. I finally said, "Hey, this is the delivery guy," and a man's voice slowly repeated my words back. It was low, almost whispery, but still deep enough to make my skin crawl. He eventually explained that his driveway was hard to spot, just a narrow dirt path off the road. He spoke in this slow, flat monotone as he described it. Sure enough, I found the turn and eased my car, a rusty old 1999 Corolla, up the dirt trail. After about 30 seconds of careful driving, a small one-story house appeared in my headlights. A dull orange glow leaked through one of the windows. I parked beside a beat-up Chevy pickup and grabbed the pizzas. The house didn't have a doorbell, so I knocked. Faint old music, like something out of the 1940s, played inside. Footsteps approached, then stopped. 10 seconds later, the door cracked open just enough for me to see one eye peeking out. "You ordered pizza, right?" I asked nervously. "Yes, the pizza," he said in the same voice I'd heard on the phone. There was a weird pause. I finally asked if he had the cash. He said, "Yes, let me go get it." His footsteps faded, and the music, now clearly coming from a vintage record player, grew louder. As I waited, the door slowly creaked wider on its own, letting me see more of the living room. Everything looked ancient. The couch sagged like it hadn't been sat on in decades. The floor was patched with sheets of metal, and the air smelled rotten, like something had died. I knocked gently on the doorframe and called, "Sir?" From the kitchen, his voice floated out again. "Would you mind coming in here, please?" I froze. Every delivery driver I knew had been warned never to step inside a customer's home, and in this moment that advice felt more important than ever. Still, I stepped just inside, the floor bending slightly under my weight. The house was built like a straight line, kitchen to the right, hallway to the left. At the far end of that hallway, a man with his back to me was dancing, slowly. His hands moved over his own body in this unsettling way. Any other time, it might have been laughable, but in that setting, it was nightmare fuel. When I turned back toward the kitchen, I caught sight of another face. The same one from before, peeking from behind the wall, only showing one eye. He didn't answer when I asked about the money again. Instead, he let out this strange, low chuckle before suddenly shouting a name. "Eddie!" His voice was loud and commanding, completely different from the monotone from before. That was my breaking point. I turned and headed for the door. As I passed the hallway, the man who had been dancing was now standing completely still, staring at me. I got outside, clutching the pizzas, and hustled to my car. When I looked back, the front door was hanging wide open again. My chest tightened at the thought of one of them sneaking up on me. I threw the pizzas into the passenger seat, started the car, and gunned it down the dirt drive. Back at Tony's, I called Sal to explain. He wasn't mad, but when I told the story inside, the other workers laughed like it was some weird joke. Maybe it sounded funny from the outside, but it wasn't funny in the moment. I've had recurring dreams ever since of that eye peering from behind the wall. After that night, I never stepped into another customer's home again. For about 2 months, I worked as a part-time delivery driver with Grubhub to make some extra cash on the weekends. I live in a small suburb outside of Phoenix, so most deliveries were quick and close by. One night, I got a pretty large order from a local burger place and decided to take it. When the food was ready, I packed it up and checked the drop-off. It was a house on the far side of town, tucked away in a cul-de-sac. I usually drove a little too fast to squeeze in more deliveries and make more money, but that night, my luck caught up to me. As I was heading down the block toward the cul-de-sac, I saw flashing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. I pulled over and sure enough, got slapped with a ticket worth way more than I'd even make that night. It was brutal, realizing I'd basically be losing money by the end of the shift. Still, I had to finish the delivery, even if it was late. Once the officer drove off, I made my way to the house, walked up to the front porch, and knocked hard since there wasn't a doorbell. As I waited, I noticed how strangely dark and empty the cul-de-sac was. There were no streetlights, just faint light coming from the 3 or 4 houses around. It didn't feel like a friendly neighborhood at all. Eventually, the door opened, and an average-built bald man stood there. He had a scruffy gray beard with yellowish stains, and his body language immediately set off alarms. He seemed drunk, maybe high. His breath reeked as he greeted me loudly and told me to come inside. I tried to hand him the bag through the doorway, but he wouldn't take it. Instead, he insisted I come in, claiming he had something for me. I refused at first, but then he said he couldn't tip through the app and would give me cash instead. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. As soon as I crossed the threshold, he slammed the door behind me. He told me to follow him into the kitchen and set the food down on the table. Against every instinct, I did. The place was filthy, trash, empty bottles, and a horrible smell. Then he walked toward a basement door, opened it, and told me to wait in the kitchen. He disappeared downstairs, closing the door behind him. Not even a minute later, I heard a massive crash from the basement, like a shelf collapsing. Then came a pained scream, followed by groaning. Concerned, I opened the basement door. Everything below was pitch black. I called down, asking if he was okay. He just kept moaning for help. I turned on my phone flashlight and started down the creaky stairs, but halfway down, his moans abruptly stopped. Silence filled the air. I froze, realizing how wrong this felt. A moment later, I heard a faint crunching sound on the basement floor, like something shifting in the darkness. Before I could decide what to do, there was a loud knock at the front door. I bolted back upstairs and opened it. It was the same cop who had pulled me over earlier. He was holding 2 folded pieces of paper clipped together, asking if they were mine. They were. But I quickly told him something was seriously wrong inside the house. I explained what I'd heard from the basement. The officer, hand resting on his holster, called down the stairs, then took out his flashlight and began walking down. I waited at the top, listening. Seconds later, I heard yelling, a scuffle, then a gunshot. The officer called up for me to shine my light as he pulled the man, now bleeding and screaming, from the basement. He guided him outside and called for backup and an ambulance. The guy was still shouting curses at the cop, even while in pain. The officer had me stick around to sign a witness statement, which took about half an hour. Driving home afterward, I couldn't help but think, if that same cop hadn't stopped me earlier, he might not have shown up at the exact moment he did. As much as I hated getting that ticket, it might have saved my life 10 minutes later.